Now let's begin. Harrison Reeves pressed his thumb against the rim of his coffee mug, watching steam curl into the December air. Through the kitchen window, frost patterns spread across the glass like fractured memories. His son Sterling sat across from him, 18 years old, and trying too hard to look confident about the upcoming Christmas Eve dinner at his grandparents' house. "Dad, it'll be fine," Sterling said, though his fingers drummed against the table. "Grandpa Gerald's been better lately." Harrison studied his son's face, seeing the same hopeful expression Elsa wore whenever she talked about her father. His wife had spent 20 years making excuses for Gerald Simmons, explaining away the man's volcanic temper, his cutting remarks, his need to dominate every room he entered. Harrison had learned to tolerate it for Elsa's sake, to bite his tongue when Gerald made his pointed comments about real men and proper discipline. "Sterling," Harrison said carefully, "if anything feels off tonight, you call me. Doesn't matter what time. You're not coming? Your mother wants family time with her parents. I'll stay here, finish editing the Riverside documentary." Harrison ran a video production company, specializing in long-form investigative pieces. His current project examined how a small town's government had systematically failed its residents during a flood crisis. The work suited him, patient, methodical, uncovering truth through careful observation. Sterling nodded, relief flickering across his features. The kid knew how tense things got when Harrison and Gerald occupied the same space. Last Thanksgiving, Gerald had spent an hour lecturing about participation trophy generations, while staring pointedly at Sterling, who'd recently chosen art school over the business degree his grandfather demanded. After Sterling left with Elsa, Harrison settled into his home office. The house felt too quiet, too full of anticipation he couldn't name. He'd grown up in Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. He'd learned early to read people, to spot the subtle tells that revealed true character beneath polite masks. It was why his documentaries worked. He knew how to wait, how to watch until people forgot the camera and revealed themselves. Gerald Simmons had never needed a camera to reveal himself. The man was a walking monument to his own importance, owner of Simmons Agricultural Supply, the largest farm equipment distributor in 3 counties. He'd built the business from his father's small hardware store, and he never let anyone forget it. His wife Wilma had learned decades ago to simply nod and agree, her own voice ground down to whispers. Harrison had met Elsa 20 years ago at a community fundraiser. She'd been volunteer coordinating, brilliant and organized, but there was a brittleness in her smiles that he recognized from his own childhood. The hypervigilance of someone raised in unpredictable anger. He'd fallen for her gentleness, her determination to build something different from what she'd known. They'd succeeded mostly. Sterling was kind, creative, confident in ways Elsa had never been allowed to be. Harrison had made sure of that, creating a home where emotions weren't weapons and mistakes weren't catastrophes. His phone buzzed at 8 p.m. Elsa's name appeared, and something cold slid through his chest. "Harry, it's okay, but there's been a situation." "Where's Sterling?" "He and Dad had a disagreement." "Sterling's walking home." "He's fine, he just..." "Walking?" "Elsa, it's below freezing," and the weather report said. "I know. I tried to talk to Dad, but you know how he gets." Sterling said he'd rather walk than stay, and honestly, maybe it's better if they both cool down. Harrison kept his voice level. "What happened?" A pause. Dad asked Sterling about his plans after graduation. Sterling mentioned the graphic design program at Portland, and Dad said he wasn't going to watch his money get wasted on drawing pictures. They argued, and Sterling said some things about Dad needing to respect his choices. Dad told him to get out. He kicked him out? In a thunderstorm? It's barely raining. "Elsa." Harrison stood, already grabbing his keys. "Where exactly did this happen?" "Sterling left about 20 minutes ago." "Harry, please don't make this worse by confronting Dad tonight." He was already out the door. 20 minutes meant Sterling was somewhere on the rural highway between the Simmons estate and town, 7 miles of dark road with no sidewalks and minimal shoulder. Rain had started, hard drops that promised worse to come. Harrison drove slowly, scanning both sides of the road. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain intensified into a deluge that turned the windshield into a waterfall despite the wipers at full speed. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. 3 miles out, his headlights caught something on the shoulder. Harrison's heart stopped. Sterling lay crumpled in the grass, clothes soaked, one shoe gone, the other barely clinging to his foot. Harrison slammed the truck into park and ran, dropping to his knees beside his son. Sterling, look at me. The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. His lips had a blue tinge, and he was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Blood streaked from a gash on his forehead where he must have fallen. Dad, I've got you. Can you stand? Together they made it to the truck. Harrison wrapped Sterling in the emergency blanket from the back seat and cranked the heat to maximum. He called Elsa while speeding toward County General. He's hypothermic. I'm taking him to the ER. Oh God, Harry, I'm so sorry, I didn't think. We'll talk later. At the hospital, they treated Sterling for mild hypothermia, a concussion from his fall, and multiple lacerations on his feet from walking barefoot the last 2 miles after losing his shoes in the mud. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Cameron Morrison who Harrison recognized from a previous documentary project, pulled him aside. He's going to be okay, but this could have been much worse. Another hour in those conditions. She shook her head. What happened? Harrison told her. Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. I'm mandated to report suspected abuse or neglect. It wasn't his mother. It was her father. Still, she made notes on her tablet. Your son is 18, so he can make his own decisions about pressing charges. But Harrison, off the record, I've seen exposure cases like this. They don't happen because of simple disagreements. Elsa arrived as they were preparing to discharge Sterling. She rushed to embrace him, tears streaming down her face. Baby, I'm so sorry. I should have driven you home. I should have. Mom, it's okay. Sterling's voice was rough, exhausted. Not your fault. Harrison watched his wife carefully. He'd seen this pattern before. Elsa apologizing for her father's behavior, absorbing the guilt that should have been Gerald's. She'd been doing it her whole life. They took Sterling home and got him settled in bed. Elsa sat beside him until he fell asleep, then joined Harrison downstairs. I talked to Dad, she said quietly. He said Sterling was disrespectful and needed to learn consequences. Consequences for what? Having his own dreams. Harry, you know how Dad is. He comes from a different generation, and he's proud, and when someone challenges him. Elsa. Harrison kept his voice gentle but firm. Our son had hypothermia. He has a concussion. He walked 7 miles in a thunderstorm because your father threw him out like garbage. Her face crumpled. I know it's not okay. But he's my father, and I can't just cut him off. Harrison pulled her close, feeling her shake with suppressed sobs. He understood the complexity, the toxic loyalty that abuse created. He'd seen it in dozens of documentary subjects. The way victims defended their abusers, minimized the damage, clung to hope for change that never came. Get some sleep, he said finally. We'll figure this out. But as Elsa headed upstairs, Harrison stayed in the kitchen, staring at nothing. Something had crystallized inside him, cold and patient and absolutely certain. Gerald Simmons had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Harrison had spent his career documenting injustice, watching powerful people escape consequences while their victims suffered. He'd trained himself to stay objective, to observe without intervening. But this wasn't a documentary subject. This was his son. Morning brought weak sunlight and the smell of snow. Harrison made breakfast while Sterling slept late, his body recovering from the trauma. Elsa moved through the kitchen like a ghost, making coffee she didn't drink, starting sentences she didn't finish. Harrison's phone rang at 10 a.m. Gerald Simmons' name appeared on the screen. He answered, saying nothing. Harrison. Gerald's voice boomed with false heartiness. Elsa told me about the boy ending up in the hospital. Unfortunate, but I hope you both understand I was teaching him an important lesson. Sometimes the world is harsh, and coddling doesn't prepare young men for reality. Harrison's grip on the phone tightened. In the background, he could hear Gerald's bark of laughter, sharing the story with someone else in the room. Walked 7 miles. That'll put some character in him. Maybe next time he'll think twice before mouthing off to his elders. Is there anything else? Harrison asked, his voice flat. Just wanted to make sure there's no hard feelings. Family is family, right? These little dust-ups happen. I'm sure Sterling learned his lesson. He certainly learned something about you. Gerald's tone cooled. Meaning what? Meaning we're all learning, Gerald. Thank you for calling. Harrison hung up before the man could respond. Elsa stood in the doorway, her face pale. He called you, she asked. To laugh about it. To make sure I understood, he was teaching Sterling a lesson. Elsa's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. For the first time in their marriage, Harrison saw something shift in her eyes. A crack in the foundation of excuses and justifications she'd built around her father. "That's not okay," she whispered. "That's really not okay, is it?" "No, love. It's not." Sterling emerged from his room around noon, moving stiffly. The bruises on his feet had darkened overnight, and the bandage on his forehead stood out stark against his pale skin. Harrison helped him to the couch and brought him water and pain medication. "Dad, I'm sorry I caused all this trouble." "Sterling, look at me." Harrison waited until his son met his eyes. "You didn't cause anything. You expressed your own dreams and goals, and you were punished for it. That's not how healthy people behave." "Mom's upset. Mom's processing some difficult realizations about her father. That's not on you either." Sterling nodded slowly. "Grandpa called me weak. Said I was wasting my potential on frivolous nonsense. When I tried to explain that graphic design is a legitimate career, he told me I was arguing with him in his own house and needed to leave." "Did he tell you to walk?" "He said, 'The door's right there. If you're such an adult with all these big opinions, you can find your own way home like an adult.'" Mom tried to intervene, but Grandma pulled her aside and told her to let Dad handle it. Sterling's voice dropped. "I thought he'd call me back. I waited by the front door for like 5 minutes, and it was raining, and I kept thinking he'd open the door and apologize. But he didn't. So I started walking." Harrison felt that cold certainty solidify further. This wasn't explosive anger or a moment of lost control. Gerald had calculated this humiliation, had orchestrated it to demonstrate his power and punish Sterling's autonomy. Over the next week, Harrison maintained his normal routines. He attended his editing sessions, took conference calls, had dinner with his family. But in the quiet hours, he researched. Gerald Simmons was predictable in the way truly arrogant men often were. He'd built his empire on being the biggest personality in the room, on making deals through intimidation and charm in equal measure. Simmons' agricultural supply employed 70 people across 3 locations. Gerald sat on the boards of the county fair, the Chamber of Commerce, and the local Rotary Club. He donated generously to causes that kept his name visible, always with plaques and recognition ceremonies. Harrison had spent 20 years documenting corruption, and he recognized the patterns. Men like Gerald believed they were untouchable. They'd gotten away with small abuses so long that they stopped seeing them as abuses at all. Their worldview became truth, their actions justified by their own importance. The dangerous thing about Harrison's work was that it had trained him to see systems, to understand how power operated, how reputations were built and maintained. And once you understood how something was built, you understood how to dismantle it. He started with the business. Public records showed that Simmons' agricultural supply had expanded aggressively over the past 5 years, acquiring 2 competitors and doubling their debt load. Nothing illegal, but it suggested cash flow pressures. Harrison made calls to sources from his journalism days, asking casual questions about the agricultural equipment market. What he learned was interesting. The industry was contracting. Smaller farms were being absorbed by larger operations, and the larger operations were buying direct from manufacturers. The middleman distributors like Simmons were getting squeezed. Several similar businesses had filed for bankruptcy in neighboring states. Harrison also called Dr. Morrison, who treated Sterling. "I need to understand something," he said. "Off the record, between friends." "Go ahead." "If someone put a child at serious risk through reckless endangerment, but the child was 18, what kind of accountability exists?" Cameron Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Legally, at 18, it's complicated. There could be a case for reckless endangerment, but it would be hard to prove intent. Practically, the damage isn't always physical. Trauma compounds. I've seen patients with hypothermia develop anxiety around cold, around being outside, around authority figures. The psychological impact can last years. What if I told you this wasn't the first incident? Then I'd say someone needs to document the pattern. And Harrison, whatever you're thinking, be careful. Men who abuse power don't give it up easily." Harrison thanked her and hung up. He wasn't planning anything illegal. He didn't need to. Men like Gerald destroyed themselves. They just needed the right circumstances to reveal their true nature publicly. His phone rang that evening. Gerald again, this time screaming. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harrison put the call on speaker so Elsa could hear. I don't know what you mean. Don't play stupid with me. I just got a call from Tom Peterson at County Child Services. Someone filed a report about Sterling's hospital visit. They're opening an investigation into our family. Dr. Morrison is a mandated reporter, Gerald. She was doing her job. This is harassment. I'm going to sue that hospital, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows you put her up to this. I didn't put anyone up to anything. You kicked an 18-year-old out in a thunderstorm, and he ended up in the hospital with hypothermia and a concussion. Actions have consequences. You self-righteous. Gerald's voice rose to a roar. You think you can threaten me? I built this community. I employ half the people in this county. You're a nobody making little videos in your basement. Is there anything else, Gerald? This isn't over. You just made an enemy you can't afford. Harrison ended the call. Elsa stood frozen, her face white. He threatened you, she said. He revealed himself. Harrison corrected. That's different. 3 weeks passed. Sterling started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family trauma. Elsa began attending sessions of her own, slowly untangling years of conditioning. Harrison continued his research, patient and methodical. The child services investigation went nowhere. Sterling was legally an adult, and Gerald's lawyers made the case that it was a family disagreement, not abuse. But the investigation itself had been noted by local media, a small article in the county newspaper about allegations involving prominent businessman Gerald Simmons. Nothing actionable, but the first crack in the carefully maintained facade. Harrison knew that reputations were fragile things, especially in small communities. They required constant maintenance, careful curation. Gerald's reputation rested on being a pillar of the community, a successful businessman, a family man. Each of those pillars could be examined. Harrison reached out to Travis Kane, an old colleague who now ran an investigative reporting nonprofit. They met for coffee at a diner outside town. I need background on someone, Harrison said. Purely informational. Travis raised an eyebrow. Harrison Reeves asking for dirt? This must be serious. It's personal. The best stories always are. Travis pulled out his notebook. Talk to me. Harrison laid out the situation carefully, sticking to facts. Travis listened, his expression growing darker. Men like this, they don't just suddenly become cruel. Travis said finally. This is a pattern that's been going on for years. You want me to dig into his business practices? I want the truth, whatever that looks like. Over the next week, Travis made calls. What emerged was a portrait of a man who'd built success through aggressive tactics that bordered on predatory. Several former competitors claimed Gerald had used information about their personal lives, affairs, family scandals, health issues, to pressure them into selling their businesses at below-market rates. Nothing illegal enough to prosecute, but a pattern of manipulation and intimidation. Harrison also learned something interesting about Gerald's relationship with his wife, Wilma. She'd inherited money from her own family, money that had seeded Gerald's initial expansion. But the inheritance had been in her name, and there were rumors of irregular transfers, of Gerald pressuring her to sign papers she didn't fully understand. When Harrison mentioned this to Elsa, she went very quiet. Mom used to have her own money, Elsa said slowly. From Grandma Helen. But Dad told her it made sense to consolidate everything under the business for tax purposes. Mom signed it all over when I was in middle school. Did she have her own lawyer review the paperwork? Dad said that would be insulting, implying she didn't trust him. Elsa's hands trembled. Oh God, Harry. How much have I made excuses for? Harrison pulled her close. This isn't your fault. You were taught to excuse this behavior from childhood. But he could see her awakening, the scales falling from her eyes. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Harrison's plan was taking shape. He wasn't going to destroy Gerald's business or bankrupt him. That would hurt the innocent employees who depended on those jobs. He wasn't going to pursue legal action that would drag Sterling through depositions and court appearances. Instead, Harrison was going to do what he did best, document the truth and let it speak for itself. He started with the County Fair Board, where Gerald served as treasurer. Harrison filed a Freedom of Information request for their financial records. What he found was illuminating. Gerald had been padding expense reports, charging personal dinners and travel to the fair's budget. Nothing massive, a few $1,000s over several years, but deeply unethical for someone in a position of public trust. Harrison compiled the documentation and sent it anonymously to the county auditor and to 3 members of the board, including Norberto Cook, a retired accountant with a reputation for integrity. Then he waited. The call came 2 weeks later. Not from Gerald, but from Elsa's mother. "Elsa, dear, I need to talk to you." Wilma's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "Without your father knowing." They met at a small cafe, 2 towns over. Harrison drove, but waited in the car while Elsa went inside. When she emerged 40 minutes later, her eyes were red, but her expression was resolved. "Mom wants to leave him," Elsa said quietly. "She's been wanting to for 20 years. But she's terrified. She says Dad controls everything, the money, the house, her medical care. She doesn't think she can survive on her own." "Did you tell her she can?" "I told her she could stay with us. That we'd help her. Harry, she told me things I didn't know. He's been this way their entire marriage. Cruel, controlling, explosive. She said she stayed because she thought it would protect me, that if she left, custody arrangements would mean I'd be alone with him more. So she endured it to be a buffer." Harrison's jaw tightened. Another victim of Gerald's need for control. "We help her," he said simply. "Whatever she needs." The next day, Gerald called Harrison's phone. When Harrison answered, he heard screaming. "You can't do that to us." "Do what, Gerald?" "Don't play innocent. The Fair Board wants my resignation. They're auditing 5 years of expenses. Someone sent them a package of irregularities, and now they're threatening to refer the whole thing to the district attorney." Harrison let the silence stretch. "You did this," Gerald hissed. "You vindictive little worm. You did this because of that nonsense with Sterling. I didn't do anything illegal. If there are irregularities in your expense reports, that's on you. It was a few dinners. Networking expenses. Everyone does it. Then I'm sure the audit will clear you. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this county again. I will." "Gerald," Harrison interrupted, his voice ice cold. "You kicked my son out into a thunderstorm and laughed about it. You put him in the hospital and called me to brag. You've spent 20 years terrorizing your wife and daughter. The only person destroying you is yourself. I'm just making sure people see what you've always been." He hung up. Elsa listened to the recording. Harrison had learned long ago to document everything. She sat very still, processing. "He's going to get worse before he gets better," she said finally. "I know. Mom's going to need help getting out. We'll be ready." The Fair Board investigation became public within days. The local newspaper ran a story about financial irregularities and Gerald's forced resignation. It wasn't front-page news, but in a small community, it might as well have been. Harrison watched the dominoes begin to fall. The Chamber of Commerce quietly asked for Gerald's resignation from their board. A major supplier notified Simmons Agricultural that they were restructuring their distributor relationships. Rotary Club meetings grew awkward when Gerald attended. But the real shift came from an unexpected direction. Norberto Cook, the retired accountant from the Fair Board, called Harrison directly. "Mr. Reeves, we've never met, but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For having the courage to come forward about Gerald's expense padding. I've suspected irregularities for years, but I could never prove it. The documentation you provided was meticulous." "I didn't provide any documentation. I just filed a FOIA request for public records." Cook chuckled. "Right. Well, whoever compiled that analysis understood accounting. They also understood Gerald Simmons. The report included notes about his behavior patterns, his manipulation tactics. It read like a psychological profile. Because it was, Harrison thought. He'd spent weeks documenting not just the financial irregularities but the pattern of behavior behind them. The bullying, the control, the assumption that rules didn't apply to him. "Mr. Cook, I'm just glad the truth came out. Truth has a way of doing that, eventually. Speaking of which, I've been on the Simmons Agricultural Board of Directors for 15 years. With all this recent attention on Gerald's ethics, I've been doing some digging into the business finances." Harrison waited. "I found some concerning patterns. Transfers between the business account and Gerald's personal account that don't match up with declared salary or distributions. Expenses that seem inflated. I think Gerald's been treating the business as his personal piggy bank for years, and with the current market contraction, it's made the company vulnerable. What are you going to do?" "I'm calling a special board meeting. As a director, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the company and its employees. If Gerald's been mismanaging funds, the board needs to know." After the call ended, Harrison sat in his office for a long time. He hadn't wanted to destroy Gerald's business. But if Gerald had been stealing from his own company, That wasn't Harrison's doing. It was consequence finally catching up to cause. Elsa found him there an hour later. Harry, Mom's decided. She's leaving Dad. She wants to do it this week while he's distracted with the board investigation. What does she need? Help moving her things. A lawyer. Emotional support. Elsa's voice cracked. I can't believe this is happening. This is her choosing freedom, Harrison said gently. That's something to support, not mourn. They spent the next 3 days helping Wilma. Harrison hired a truck and 3 strong friends from his documentary crew. While Gerald was at an emergency Simmons Agricultural Board meeting, they moved Wilma's personal belongings, her mother's furniture, and boxes of documents she'd been secretly copying for weeks. The documents were revealing. Wilma had kept records of every major financial decision Gerald had pressured her into, including the transfer of her inheritance. She'd documented years of verbal abuse through a journal she'd hidden in her sewing room. She'd even saved threatening text messages from recent months, where Gerald had warned her about embarrassing him publicly if she discussed their private family matters. Harrison helped her photograph everything and stored digital copies in secure cloud storage. Then he connected her with a divorce attorney Travis recommended, someone who specialized in high-asset divorces involving financial abuse. The day Wilma served Gerald with divorce papers, Harrison was editing footage in his home office. His phone exploded with texts from Elsa. Dad's having a meltdown. He's calling everyone, claiming Mom's been brainwashed. He showed up at our house. Harrison was already moving. He found Gerald on their front porch, red-faced and sweating despite the cold. Where is she? Gerald demanded. Not here. Elsa, get out here. Tell your mother this is insane. I'm her husband. She can't just leave me. Elsa appeared in the doorway, and Harrison saw something he'd never seen before, his wife standing firm against her father. Dad, Mom has every right to leave you. You've treated her terribly for decades. Treated her terribly? I gave her everything. The house, the lifestyle, status in this community. You gave her a cage, Elsa said quietly. And you're upset because she found the key. Gerald's face went purple. This is your doing. He pointed at Harrison. You turned my family against me. The investigation, my wife leaving, all of it. You orchestrated this. Harrison met his eyes. I didn't orchestrate anything, Gerald. I just stopped making excuses for you. And once people saw who you really are, they made their own choices. I'll ruin you. I'll sue you for alienation of affection, for harassment, for what? Documenting public records? Supporting my mother-in-law's legal right to divorce? You can't sue someone for telling the truth. Gerald lunged forward, and Harrison sidestepped smoothly. Years of documentary work in volatile situations had taught him to read body language, to anticipate aggression. He'd also installed security cameras around his property weeks ago, currently recording everything. I'd leave now, Harrison said calmly. Before this becomes trespassing. Gerald stood there, chest heaving, and for the first time Harrison saw something new in the man's eyes, fear. Gerald was realizing his power had always been smoke and mirrors, maintained by other people's willingness to believe in it. And that belief was evaporating. This isn't over, Gerald said, but his voice had lost its thunder. Yes, it is, Harrison replied. You just don't know it yet. The Simmons Agricultural Board meeting resulted in Gerald being placed on administrative leave pending a full financial audit. Norberto Cook was appointed interim CEO. Within a week, the auditors found what Harrison had suspected: years of irregular transfers, inflated expenses, and creative accounting that had masked the company's deteriorating financial position. The board called another meeting. Gerald was asked to resign as majority shareholder and CEO in exchange for the company not pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement. The business would be restructured, his shares redistributed to create an employee ownership trust. Gerald would receive a modest severance and non-compete agreement. He had no choice but to agree. Harrison watched from a distance as Gerald's empire crumbled. The man had built everything on reputation and intimidation, and both had proven insubstantial. His social standing evaporated. His business was taken from him. His wife was divorcing him with documentation that made her case for financial abuse ironclad. But Harrison's plan had one more element. He'd been documenting everything. The hospital records from Sterling's hypothermia, the recording of Gerald laughing about it, witness statements from the Christmas Eve dinner, Wilma's journals, the financial irregularities, the pattern of abuse and control spanning decades. He compiled it all into a 90-minute documentary. Not for public release, not for profit. Just truth, laid out in careful, devastating detail. The title card read, "The Cost of Silence, One Family's Story." Harrison screened it privately for Sterling, Elsa, and Wilma. They sat in his home office, watching Gerald's behavior patterns revealed through their own accounts, through documentation, through the cold evidence of abuse that had been normalized for so long. When it ended, Sterling spoke first. "You made this for us." "I made this so you'd never doubt your own memories," Harrison said. Abusers count on people forgetting, on gaslighting, on making victims question their own experiences. This is the truth, documented and undeniable. If you ever doubt whether you were right to stand up to him, you can watch this and remember. Wilma was crying, but her face was peaceful. "I spent 40 years making excuses for him, telling myself it wasn't that bad, that he didn't mean it, that I was too sensitive. Seeing it all together like this, there's no denying it anymore." Elsa held her mother's hand. "We're free of him, Mom. We're actually free." 6 months later, Harrison stood in his backyard watching Sterling paint. His son had enrolled in the Portland graphic design program, but he'd spent the summer at home, healing and creating. The canvas showed a thunderstorm over a dark road, but in the distance, a house with warm, glowing windows. "What do you think?" Sterling asked. "I think it's honest," Harrison said. "That's the best kind of art." Elsa joined them, Wilma close behind. The older woman had transformed in the months since leaving Gerald. She laughed more, spoke with confidence, made decisions without seeking permission. She'd gotten a small apartment in town and reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with over the years. Gerald, by contrast, had faded into obscurity. The divorce settlement left him with a small portion of Wilma's original inheritance. She'd had an excellent attorney, and he'd moved to a modest condo on the edge of town. Former friends avoided him. Business associates stopped returning calls. He'd filed a lawsuit against Harrison for emotional distress and defamation, but his lawyer had withdrawn after reviewing the documentary and advising him that everything in it was factually accurate and legally defensible. Harrison's phone buzzed. Travis Kane's name appeared. "You sitting down?" Travis asked. "Should I be?" "The documentary you made, the private one about Gerald. Wilma gave me permission to show it to a producer friend who specializes in domestic abuse awareness. They want to discuss a broader project. Not releasing yours, but using the framework to create something that helps other families recognize these patterns. Changing names, protecting identities, but using the structure you created." Harrison glanced at his family, Sterling painting, Elsa and Wilma chatting quietly. "I'll think about it." This was personal, not professional. "I know. But Harrison, you documented something important. The way abuse looks from the outside versus what it really is. The systematic nature of it. How it compounds over time. That has value beyond just your family." After hanging up, Harrison considered the idea. He'd spent his career documenting injustice, but always from a distance, always as an observer. This time had been different. This time he'd been part of the story. Sterling put down his brush and turned to Harrison. "Dad, I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For not letting Grandpa Gerald get away with what he did. For showing me that standing up to bullies isn't just possible, it's necessary." Harrison pulled his son into a hug. "You stood up first, Sterling. That Christmas Eve, you could have backed down, could have apologized for having your own dreams. But you didn't. You walked away from his house because you knew your worth. I just made sure the world understood what that actually meant." As the sun set, Harrison reflected on the past months. He hadn't destroyed Gerald Simmons. The man had destroyed himself through decades of abusive behavior that eventually caught up with him. Harrison had simply documented the truth and stopped participating in the collective delusion that protected men like Gerald from consequences. The real victory wasn't Gerald's downfall. It was Sterling's confidence, Elsa's healing, Wilma's freedom. It was the family they were building, one based on honesty instead of fear, on support instead of control. That evening, Harrison got one final call from Gerald. "I know what you did." The man's voice was hoarse, defeated. "You systematically took apart my entire life." "No, Gerald. I documented what you'd built and showed it to people without the smoke and mirrors you'd relied on. Your life fell apart because it was built on lies, intimidation, and abuse. I'm losing everything. You lost everything the moment you kicked Sterling out into a thunderstorm. You just didn't realize it yet. A long silence. Then, I want to see my daughter. My grandson. That's between you and them. But Gerald, if you contact them, it'll be on their terms, not yours. No more demands. No more control. No more abuse. I'm not an abuser. The documentation says otherwise. The hospital records, the financial abuse, the testimony of your wife and daughter, it all says otherwise. The only person who doesn't see it is you. Harrison heard something that might have been a sob, might have been rage. He didn't particularly care which. You destroyed me, Gerald whispered. No, Harrison said quietly. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. Everything that's happened is consequence, not revenge. You taught Sterling a lesson that night. You taught him what kind of man you are. And then I made sure everyone else learned it too. He hung up. Sterling appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. Was that him? Yeah. What did he want? Absolution, I think. Or maybe just to blame someone else for his choices. Sterling handed Harrison a cup and sat beside him. Do you think he'll ever understand what he did wrong? Probably not. Men like your grandfather build their identity around being right, being strong, being in control. Admitting they were wrong would shatter that identity. It's easier to blame others than face the truth. That's sad. It is. But it's not our responsibility to fix him, Sterling. Our responsibility is to build better, to be better, to make sure this pattern doesn't continue. Sterling nodded slowly. I start Portland in the fall. I'm nervous, but also excited. You should be both. That's how you know it's the right choice. Thanks, Dad. For everything. For coming to find me that night. For standing up to Grandpa. For showing me that you can be strong without being cruel. Harrison squeezed his son's shoulder. That's what fathers do, kid. We protect our children, and we teach them how to protect themselves. As winter gave way to spring, the Reeves family moved forward. Sterling prepared for college. Elsa continued therapy and grew stronger every day. Wilma filed paperwork to reclaim her maiden name and started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her story to help others recognize the signs of abuse. Harrison returned to his documentary work with renewed purpose. He partnered with the producer Travis had connected him with to create a series examining domestic abuse in seemingly successful families. They changed all identifying details but kept the framework, how abuse hides behind respectability, how communities enable it through silence, how victims are gaslit into doubting their own experiences. The project was called Behind Closed Doors, and it won awards. More importantly, it helped people. Harrison received emails from viewers sharing their own stories, thanking him for making them feel less alone, less crazy, less wrong for wanting to escape. One email particularly moved him. It was from a woman named Candace Hansen who'd watched the series with her adult children. For years, we thought we were the problem, she wrote. My ex-husband was a respected doctor, beloved in our community. When we tried to talk about his behavior at home, people didn't believe us. Your documentary showed the exact pattern we lived through. My children are in therapy now. I'm rebuilding my life. Thank you for showing that we weren't imagining it. Harrison shared the email with his family over dinner. This is why the documentary mattered, Elsa said. Not just for us, but for everyone who's lived through something similar. Wilma nodded. I wish someone had shown me that pattern 40 years ago. I might have had the courage to leave sooner. But you left eventually, Sterling pointed out. And now you're helping other people leave too. Harrison watched his family, stronger, healthier, free. This was the real victory. Not Gerald's downfall, but their rising. A year after that Christmas Eve, Harrison organized a different kind of Christmas dinner. His house filled with laughter, Sterling home from college, Elsa and Wilma preparing food together, Dr. Morrison and Travis joining them as friends who'd become family. No one mentioned Gerald. The man had become irrelevant, a cautionary tale rather than an active presence in their lives. As they gathered around the table, Sterling raised his glass. I want to make a toast. To family, real family, the kind you choose and build together. To second chances and new beginnings. And to my dad, who taught me that standing up to bullies isn't just about confrontation. It's about strategic, patient, unrelenting pursuit of truth. Harrison smiled. And to you, Sterling, for being brave enough to walk away from abuse, even when it meant walking 7 miles in a thunderstorm. Never again, Sterling said firmly. Never again will I accept someone treating me that way. Never again, the whole table echoed. Later, as guests filtered out and the house quieted, Harrison found Elsa on the porch, watching snowfall. You thinking about him? Harrison asked. My father? A little. Wondering if he's alone tonight, if he has any regrets. Probably not. Men like that don't tend towards self-reflection. I know. It's just, I spent so long hoping he'd change, that he'd become the father I needed. I'm still grieving that person, even though he never actually existed. Harrison pulled her close. You're allowed to grieve the father you should have had, even while being glad the father you did have is no longer in your life. How did you get so wise? I married a woman who taught me that love isn't about control. That family isn't about dominance. That strength can be gentle. He kissed her forehead. You showed me what real courage looks like, choosing to break generational patterns, choosing to build something different. Inside, Sterling was showing Wilma his portfolio from the semester. The grandmother and grandson laughed together, their bond deepening in freedom rather than fear. Harrison's phone buzzed one last time that night. A final message from Gerald Simmons. Merry Christmas. Harrison deleted it without responding. Some people didn't deserve his energy, didn't deserve closure, didn't deserve anything but the natural consequences of their own choices. He went inside, locked the door, and joined his family. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, making everything clean and new. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.